Here's an experiment. When you hear this chord, do you feel that it's sonically closer to this chord or to this chord? Type 1 in the comments if you think it's closer to this chord, and type 2 if you think it's closer to this chord. I'm really curious to see what the consensus is here. This really gets at the heart of our perception of chords. As a younger piano student, when I was learning this Chopin prelude in C minor, I remember hitting this chord here and just connecting very deeply with this chord, so dramatic, so epic, and thinking, okay, yeah, this is a C minor chord first inversion, right? We have the E flat in the bass, we have C, and we have G. But also thinking like, wait, this to me is very, very different from C minor. It feels like some other chord entirely. To me, it's much closer to an E flat chord with a C in it, rather than a C minor first inversion. So what's important? Is it the bass note or is it the root of the chord that's the important part? What even is this label that we put on the sound? Do chords even exist in the first place? In this video, we'll talk a little bit about what chords are, and then we're going to look at many ways that you can combine chords in order to create more interesting harmonies. And we'll do that in increasing levels of spiciness, so we'll keep this spiceometer here on the side to keep track of things. Let's go.
This is your world.
I want to challenge the concept of the chord because it's so strongly established in our musical culture. We're kind of brainwashed to the chord. And the reason I want to challenge it is because chords are an extremely powerful tool to get music done fast. But at some point, if you don't challenge the concept, it can actually become an obstacle to creativity. In music history books, officially, Jean-Philippe Rameau is the inventor of the chord. And what we mean by that is not that he invented the consonant triad. Those had been used for many centuries before him, but rather that he theorized the concept of the chord as we know it with its inversions. A composer from the Middle Ages, let's take Guillaume de Machaut for instance, who has not been exposed to this theory, but also has not been exposed to decades of tonal brainwash on the radio or Hollywood film music, he would perceive chords very differently from modern composers. The first difference is Guillaume de Machaut is probably attributing much more weight to the horizontal melodies rather than the vertical structures. He's basically writing melodic lines, and when he's looking at the vertical results of these stacked melodies, I think he's mostly looking at the intervals between the notes. Like, okay, this is a third, and this is a sixth, and this is a fifth, all good. Of course, he's building harmonies, and, we would have to ask him. But I think it's mostly a question of, I have these beautiful melodies in mind, what kind of superposition allows them to not clash too much and coexist? Which is very different from singing a melody and trying to find chords on the guitar that support this melody well, in which case you don't really care about how the voices move on the guitar. Of course, they also had pop music back then. It was called troubadour, but it was mostly monophonic. There was not really harmony involved. Today's video is sponsored by LiberLive, who just quietly dropped something I've never seen before. This is a stringless, smart backing guitar. It's the LiberLive C1. So this is huge for people who want to get into singing or exploring harmony. They don't necessarily have the music theory tools to be able to create all these chords on a traditional instrument. No prior musical experience is needed. You can master it in just 5 minutes. Here's how it works. Basically, the chords here are represented as degrees. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You have 2 paddles over here that allow you to strum 2 different patterns on these chords. They even have a finger picking mode. No music theory is needed. Basically, it takes 5 minutes to learn, and you can customize the key here by turning this little knob here on the left. And the best part of that is the LiberLive app, which allows you to choose from a huge repertoire of interactive chord sheets. And the app basically tells you what is the next chord that you should play directly here on the instrument. For instance, when you were here before. Couldn't look you in the eye. Let's try the one-man band option that adds a bass line and a drum to what you're doing. Your skin makes me cry. For each degree, you have access to 3 different chords, like F major 7, or F minor. So, and you can customize those depending on the song that you're playing. So it actually allows you to play pretty much any song. And the backing track, the backing band, can be customized to a bunch of different styles, like jazz, country, pop, whatever. And there's a metronome to specify the tempo here that you want to be playing at. What's new to me is the app basically knows where you are in the song, and it's going to tell you with these LEDs on the guitar what chord you should be playing next. It's light and portable. You can fold it to the size of a laptop. So that's pretty neat. You can carry it with you while traveling or on-to-go music sessions. So go ahead and check these guys out at LiberLive.com. There's a big Black Friday sale going on right now until the 2nd of December, so don't miss a chance. It's a great educational tool and a pretty novel way of thinking about how to make musical instruments more accessible to the general public. And to kids. I mean, let's be honest, I'm going to be giving this to my nephew at Christmas for sure. Okay, now back to chord gradients. The second difference between a modern composer and Guillaume de Machaut is that, well, if there's no chords, there's no inversions of chords. So there's no way that Guillaume de Machaut would perceive this as a C chord. He would think, okay, we have an E bass with a minor third and a minor sixth on top. And that really changes the vibe if you perceive this more as an E minor chord rather than a C major chord. And if we just zoom ahead a few centuries, this way of thinking about things has had repercussions in figured bass, which is basically the ancestor of chord notation. It was used a lot in Baroque repertoire, basically instructing a harpsichordist or an organist what chords to play in order to accompany an orchestra. If you look at the way figured bass would notate EGC, they would basically write an E in the bass staff and write 6 below it. And then you need to look at the key signature to figure out whether it's going to be a C sharp or a C natural. But basically, all the weight is put on the bass note, and then all the other notes are notated as intervals relative to this bass note. So there's kind of a tension between the figured bass model and the chord-based model developed by Rameau, which cares more about the root of the chord and not caring too much about where it's placed in the chord. Even if it's at the top of the voicing, we still see it as being the generator of the whole harmony. And I have a hunch that maybe the chordal model is skewing a little bit our perception of what is really happening in the frequency spectrum. But is there a way that we could test that?
Let things happen and use what happens.
So what is a chord really? Are they just hallucinations that we overlap on top of the acoustic reality? By the standard definition, a chord happens as soon as you have multiple notes played at once. Then what is a note? Well, unless you're using pure sine waves, a note is itself a set of frequencies. Every note that you're going to play on the keyboard will come with a series of higher, softer frequencies that ring with it. I have a video on the harmonic series if you're interested in learning more about overtones. So if every note is a set of frequencies and a chord is a set of notes, well, a chord is a set of sets of frequencies. What you're seeing here is a widget that we're building for the Music Maps project, and it basically shows the different harmonics of a single pitch. And when you play 2 different pitches, it's going to tell you exactly where the harmonics clash. So let's, for instance, try E and C, similar to the chord that we were analyzing at the beginning. And we can see that over here, there is a first patch where harmonics clash. So the third harmonic of the E, which is this B here, clashes with the second harmonic of the C because they're only a half step apart. So the widget tells you where the harmonics clash, and then it outputs a global value for dissonance, which is really cool. By the way, you can play with that yourself if you want to. Just head over to musicmaps.app. We'll be starting to launch features progressively until Christmas. We'd be glad to have you test it out and tell us what you think. So here, if we compare E minor with C major first inversion, The first thing that's interesting is the C major chord is actually more dissonant than the minor chord. We learned that the major chord is more consonant. But here in this inversion, because of the patch of dissonance we were talking about earlier, the C chord is actually more dissonant. And so if you compare this C inverted chord with the C major chord, there's a huge difference in the FFT, in the spectrum, and also the dissonance level changes a lot. So we're at 14% here with the fundamental version of the C chord, and when we invert it, we get to 23% dissonance. I know it's not very scientific, but based on that dissonance parameter, the people that have answered option 2 at the beginning were actually closer to the acoustic truth. So it's just one instance where these tags that we put on the sound kind of skew a little bit our perception of what's really happening.
Looking with never seeing.
Now, the other thing that makes things more complicated is that when you start adding sevenths and other extensions to chords, you start getting chords within chords. For instance, C major 7 contains an E minor triad inside its structure. And it's easy to forget about that because we have sort of reified chords as solid objects that don't overlap. Like this is a C major 7 and this is an E minor. But if you pay close attention, you can actually hear the E minor sound or emotion inside of the C major 7. I went to a meditation retreat last summer, and you're basically living as a monk for a week and food is prepared for you and all you have to do is be mindful of everything. And at the end of the retreat, there was a guy who was recalling this moment where he was eating, and he suddenly had a breakthrough moment of realizing that raisins are actually grapes. He was saying, yeah, I had this moment where I found the grape in raisin. And it's kind of the same thing here. If you try to parse the frequencies a bit differently, you can hear the emotional impact of this E minor chord, which is, if you're in C major, a very sad chord, often associated with despair and loneliness. So it makes sense that if you add these notes on top of a C fundamental, you're kind of taking this C major structure and making it a little bit more subdued, melancholic, etc. Like Satie is doing. He's saying at the beginning, lent et douloureux, which means slow and painful. And for us, these chords have become kind of synonymous with chill jazz, but for him, probably it was more dissonant than to us today. So if I really wanted to move as smoothly as possible from C to E minor, I would probably go like this, start with the C chord, add the major 7th, then invert the chord, and then remove the C entirely, right? And there you go, you have a gradient between C major and E minor, and then you can sample that gradient wherever you want to serve your music. And honestly, it's a practice that can open up some new sounds and chord changes. We don't normally think of harmony that way. You can just pick a starting chord and ask yourself, okay, what is the fastest way to get to, say, an A flat chord? So there's two ways of doing this. You could start by making the chord minor and then switching this G to an A flat and then inverting the chord. There you go. So you have this gradient. And it's not trivial here. There's two different ways of doing this. You could start by moving this G to an A flat, in which case you would get an augmented chord, and then the end result. This reminds me of assembly theory, where they're trying to figure out the number of steps it takes to build a complex molecular object from simple chemical building blocks. And now we're kind of applying this to music, trying to figure out how many steps it takes to take an initial chord and go to an end state. So you could potentially imagine a 3D space with every chord notated as a point in that graph, and the chords that are only one step away from each other would be like clustered together, but the chords that take like 4 or 5 steps to reach would be much further away in that graph, and that would be like the space of all possible harmonies. Let's crank it up one notch higher. I want us to have a look at a small etude by Schumann. I'll just play it and you can follow along with the chord graph. So we're in G major. This chord in particular, which gets me every time. It's a very warm chord, but also with a touch of sadness in it and resignation, and we're going to try to understand how that works. So we're in a very tonal context. We're going to start and finish on the G chord, and before that we have the 5 chord, the dominant chord, which is a D7 chord, which Schumann just transforms a little bit. You know, we start on the D chord and then he makes it augmented before resolving to the G. Already that's a nice little manipulation. I don't think Mozart would have done that in his time, so it's kind of a hint that this piece was composed in the Romantic era. The chord before that is preparing the dominant. There are 2 degrees that accomplish this function of preparing the dominant: the 2nd degree and the 4th degree. C is going to sound very happy, warm, mother-like, caring, and A minor is going to sound a bit more sad with a touch of resignation in it. So for instance, you could go like 4, 5, 1, or you could go 2, 5, 1. And the voicing that Schumann chooses here is a very interesting blend of these 2 emotions. Basically C, G, A, E. So if we try to put these notes back in order of thirds, we're going to get an A minor 7 chord. The inversion of the A minor chord is very important here because it's based on the C. We perceive this almost as a C chord actually, with a touch of sadness in it rather than a completely minor chord. So if I had to trace a gradient between the 4th degree and the 2nd degree here, so between C and A minor, I would go probably C, G, E, and then I would add the A like in the piece. Then I would probably invert everything to get an A minor 7, still with a G in it, and then I would remove it to get a proper A minor chord. So this chord kind of stands left of center in the gradient between C and A minor. By the way, every time you have a major chord and you find it too cheesy, you can always make it a little bit more melancholic by adding the note of the minor relative. So here, you can put an A anywhere in the structure, you can put it here, you can put it here, and it's going to damper a little bit the bright quality of the major chord.
Painting should always be fun.
Okay, let's crank it up higher. If you're trying to build an 11th chord, I don't recommend calculating every interval. I recommend just stacking the major triad that's 1 step below your fundamental. Meaning, if you're trying to build a G11 chord, just put a G and then on top of it, stack an F major triad. Don't worry about the 3rd and the 5th of this chord because the 5th we can always remove without any problems, and the 3rd in this case, since the 11th is a C, it's going to clash with the 11th, so we prefer to just remove those 2 and just play it like this. You could play the D2. This is also a valid G11 chord. But basically, it's just a combination of the 4th degree F with the 5th degree G in the bass. If you want to build a G13, well, you just build an F major 7 on top of a G bass. So those types of 9, 11, and 13 chords are very good at creating a bright, optimistic, open 5th degree with a promise of resolution on the tonic chord. But they're basically a mashup between the 4th degree and the 5th degree. So it makes sense that it creates a very positive result because we're just mashing up 2 of the most important major chords in the scale. Let's look at one more situation of chord blending that is very telling, and that is the interaction between the main dominant and the dominant of the minor relative. So, you know, in a scale, you have the major tonic, the 1st degree, and you have the minor relative, the 6th degree, which is also called the minor tonic, and both have a dominant chord that can lead to them. So G7 can go to C, whereas E7 can go to A, right? Kind of going towards the dark side. Well, in jazz, if you're trying to make your G chord more gnarly, I hope I pronounced that right, gnarly, I think you just skipped the G, right? Gnarly. Anyways, if you have a G7 chord, one of the things you often see is we're going to add a flat 9 on top of it. And also you could add a 13 on top of it, making it a G flat 9 13th. Well, what notes have we just added? We just added a G sharp and an E, which are basically the most important notes in an E chord. So we're kind of mashing up the major dominant with the minor dominant and creating a lot of tension by doing so. Infusing some of the E chordness into the G harmony, making it more minory, more dissonant, more dark side-ish. On the other hand, if we flip things around and we start with an E7 chord, the chord that screams jazz when you play it is this infamous sharp 9 chord, right? So basically we're taking this G note, this happy 5th degree, and we're sort of trapping it inside of a dissonant structure that has nothing to do with it. So if I were to lay out the chord gradient between G7 and E7, let's start here with G7, put a flat 9 in it, put a 13, and then invert everything so that the E lands in the bass and the G is now on top, and then you can maybe switch the G to a G sharp to make it a proper E7 chord. And you have this gradient that you can sample, which contains some of the most interesting dominant structures used in jazz music. In any case, chords are a useful compression of the sonic reality, but like every type of compression out there, if you start assimilating the tag with the acoustic reality, you're going to lose some information. There is much musical wealth and inspiration to be found by just tearing these chords apart and looking at the substructures and the individual movement of the voices that compose them. I hope you see chords a little bit differently than when you clicked on this video, and as always, the most important thing is that you go make music.